Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really tough but super important story. It's about medicine, power, and a hidden history of exploitation that started long ago, but as you'll see, is far from over. Okay, let's set the scene. It's 1996 in Kano, Nigeria. A deadly meningitis outbreak is sweeping through the city. And right in the middle of this chaos, the pharmaceutical giant Pfizer shows up. They set up a tent offering what seemed like a miracle cure, a new experimental drug called Troven. And the result? Absolutely devastating. 11 children died after being given this drug. The thing is, their parents were never really told about the risks. They didn't give what we call informed consent. They were desperate, and they were taken advantage of. And what about the kids who survived? For dozens of them, the story is just as horrific. They were left with permanent, life-altering injuries, blindness, deafness, even brain damage. A place that was supposed to offer hope became a tragic experiment. It took years, but after denying any wrongdoing the whole time, Pfizer eventually and quietly paid out a $75 million settlement. But here's the crucial part. What happened in Kano wasn't some random one-off tragedy. Nope. It was just the latest chapter in a long, dark story of medical exploitation in Africa. So to really get our heads around how something like that could even happen, we have to hit rewinds way back. We're talking about the colonial era, when Western medicine first arrived in Africa. So here was the sales pitch. Colonial medicine was this great humanitarian, civilizing mission. But what was really going on? It was all about the bottom line. The main goal wasn't actually healing the African population. It was about protecting the empire's assets, the soldiers, the traders, the people who kept the whole colonial machine running. And you don't even have to take my word for it. Just look at where they built the hospitals. Not out in the villages where most people actually lived. They were built right next to the mines, the ports, and the railway lines. Medicine followed the money, not the need. And this is so important. This new system didn't just show up in a vacuum. It actively crushed what was already there. For generations, people had their own science, their own healing traditions using plants like bitterleaf, plants that, by the way, modern labs are now studying. But back then, it was all dismissed as primitive superstition or witchcraft. So what happens when you have that kind of dismissive, arrogant mindset? Well, it gets terrifying fast. It turned actual human beings, African bodies, into little more than evidence for some really brutal and often deadly experiments. I mean, just look at this timeline. It's a century of exploitation laid bare. From German doctors in Namibia shipping the skulls of murdered people back to Europe for so-called racial science, to thousands in the Belgian Congo being injected with an arsenic compound that caused blindness and death. And then they did it again in British Uganda. They blinded so many people it was literally nicknamed the blinding cure. And you have to understand, this wasn't just random cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was all propped up by this dangerous and completely discredited ideology called eugenics. The whole idea was to prove that one race was superior, giving them a supposedly scientific excuse to justify racism, control, and all these atrocities. Okay, so it's tempting to think, well, that's all in the past, right? Colonialism ended. But the thing is, the underlying system of exploitation didn't just vanish. It just put on a new outfit. And this chart, wow, it says it all. Check out the imbalance today. Africa hosts about a fifth of all clinical trials in the world, so its population is a massive resource for medical research. But the continent manufactures less than 2% of its own medicine. Think about that. They're the testing ground, but they almost never get to own the final product. And if you think that colonial mindset is long gone, just listen to this. This isn't from some dusty old book. This was said on live TV in 2020. Two French doctors just casually suggesting, hey, maybe we should test COVID vaccines in Africa. You know, like we did for AIDS studies with prostitutes. Just unbelievable. That one quote just lays it all bare, doesn't it? The mindset is still there. It's just hidden behind friendlier sounding words now, like collaboration and global health partnership. But that underlying assumption that Africa is a convenient laboratory for the West, it's still dangerously alive and well. So the big question is, how do you break this cycle? How do you finally end this legacy of dependency and exploitation? Right. That's the fundamental challenge. How does an entire continent shift from being the subject of research to being the author of its own health solutions? The path forward really boils down to one word: sovereignty. It's about taking back control. And here's the roadmap. First, you've got to fund your own research, your own labs. Second, bring back that indigenous knowledge and blend it with modern science. Third, and this is huge, build factories to make your own medicine for Africans by Africans. And finally, you demand ownership. The data, the patents, if the research happens on your soil, it belongs to you.
Now, this isn't about rejecting modern medicine at all. It's about creating something new, something better. It's about blending that ancient wisdom with cutting-edge science, but doing it on Africa's own terms, rooted in dignity, not dependency.
And that brings us to the question we have to leave you with. It's a simple one, but it's powerful. Whenever help is offered, we have to ask, who is really benefiting here? Because true progress, well, that's when partnerships empower communities to become the authors of their own cure, ensuring that help is never, ever again a mask for exploitation.